Can I piggyback on the diversity question? Because as you were speaking, I was thinking about this quite a bit in my career about diversity and how during the course of my business career, professional career, how I had to learn to widen the lens on what diversity really meant. At the beginning it was racial diversity, gender diversity, very clear-cut boxes. But then I, learned, and I find it to be very helpful in business, to be sensitive to economic diversity, cultural diversity, geographic diversity, all these various issues, economic diversity in particular. People who come from a certain economic strata have they view the world through a lens that is not reality for other people. And being sensitive and aware of that, even political diversity, being open and able to hear and understand that people are coming from different political places is really, it doesn't sound like business, but it is, because it all comes down to relationships and managing those relationships and having effective and productive relationships and being sensitive to the very many different places that people could be coming from and surrounding yourself with people coming from different places so you get the benefit of those different perspectives is really important. It's really easy to surround ourselves with like people. And I don't mean that just as race or gender. Sometimes it's economic. People who are in the same economic strata as I found it beneficial to be open to having a network of people who come from a lot of different places, because it informs my thinking in a way that's much richer than if I'm only in the echo chamber with people who think and have the same experiences as me.
Could I just say one
Sure.
other thing? In listening to him, one other thing I think was really very powerful for me was perception. People looked at me and had certain opinions about who I was, my ethnic background, my cultural background. I was raised down the road in Richmond, Virginia, which is considered the South. But in football, you have the South and you have the South. And I didn't understand the dirty South. So when I said, I'm from the South, they said, no, Doc, you're not from the South. We're from the dirty South, which was Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. Well, I wasn't really understanding what that meant, but that was very important that I understand that distinction. And I was trained in the Midwest, and so understanding some cultural differences, what that meant. So they looked at me and they formed certain opinions about who I was based on where I was from. And I was very proud where I was from, but I lived in Dallas. But here's something that really taught me something, and I try to present as an educated professional person. One day, I said a word considered bad. It started with an S and ended with a T. And you would have thought I almost murdered someone because they had this perception of me that I didn't use language like that. Now, the Navy's right in Virginia, so you can imagine what my mouth can be like growing up. But they had that perception of me because of how I presented myself. The other thing is the professional demeanor and how I carried myself. I made sure that my clothes looked a certain way. I didn't have low-cut tops. I didn't wear things too short or too tight. I still was very sensitive with how I appeared, even if it was a casual environment, because I was still working. And that really was very powerful because they were watching. They paid attention to how I presented myself, because these young men were also looking for women that presented themselves in a certain way, unbeknownst to me. And the last thing about the power of how you're perceived. When my husband and I were celebrating their anniversary, my anniversary, somebody got wind of that and said, well, Doc, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. Why don't you give me some suggestions? And they came up with some very good suggestions. And at that time, it was 20 years, which was several years ago. And one guy came up to me and he said, Doc, I don't know anyone that has been married 20 years. Now, I never even stopped to think about what that meant, that this young man had never met or didn't know anyone that had been married in that length of time. That was a societal change culturally, that there are so many single-parent homes or blended families, that they don't know someone that has been married to the same person for over 20 years. And that was really striking to me, because that was teaching me to understand the context, the cultural context of the people I was working with, and how that evolved and had changed over a period of time since I was their age. And that's another type of culture change, is the cultural context. What is the context that the people that you're dealing with come from? Because you can't make an assumption that people were raised in America just because they sound to be American. People from other cultures and countries speak English better than I do often, or speak several languages. So these are things that brought to my attention to slow down and pay attention to more than just what met the eye and what brought us together, to look beyond that as well.